Live from Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler, hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come gather round the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Great to be with you. World-renowned filmmaker, ufologist James Fox is standing by, along with our good friend Victor Viggiani from Zealand News Network. James has a brand new documentary out called The Phenomenon, and we'll delve into that in just moments. Carlos Cagina is my technical producer, and Ryan White is my live stream producer. And yes, we're live streaming on my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. If you've joined us on the live stream and it's your first time, please just hit that red sub button. We have 22,000 subscribers. Please help us to get to 25,000. All right. Director James Fox's explosive documentary, The Phenomenon, is being hailed as the most credible and revealing film ever made about the long-standing global cover-up and mystery involving unidentified aerial phenomenon, including shocking, never-before-seen testimony from high-ranking government and military officials, NASA astronauts, and riveting footage. The timely film includes bombshell reveals about UAP incursions at nuclear weapon facilities and the monumental events behind the New York Times' recent disclosure of UFO videos and the Pentagon's classified UFO program, providing eye-opening evidence that mankind is not alone in the universe. Senator Harry Reid says the phenomenon makes the incredible credible. James Fox began his journalism career in life as an assistant to his father, writer Charles Fox, a quadriplegic with multiple sclerosis. Together, they traveled on many magazine assignments, interviewing such notables as Stephen Hawking and race car legend Dan Gurney for the likes of Rolling Stone, Car and Driver, to Sports Illustrated. James finished and sold his first documentary to Discovery by the time he was 28. He's since completed and distributed TV projects for Sci-Fi, TLC, National Geographic, and the History Channel. His films include Out of the Blue, I Know What I Saw, and his latest, The Phenomenon. Welcome, James Fox. How are you?
That was a mouthful. I got to meet this guy.
You just keep building that resume. It's a pleasure to have you on. Let me just welcome my special co-host and good friend. Victor Viggiani is the executive director of Zealand Communications and Zealand News Network. He's a retired school principal from Toronto. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and Psychology from York University and a Master's in Educational Administration and Curriculum Development from Brock University. Victor's research and analysis of anomalous aerial phenomenon spans well over 30 years. His experience involves UFO sightings, report investigation, counseling work with individuals reporting anomalous experiences, presentations, and journalism in the field of ETI disclosure issues. Victor, welcome to you. How are you, my friend?
Just fine, and great to be with you both, James and my good friend Richard.
James,
what a wonderful introduction. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I finished watching the documentary this afternoon, and it looks like you started filming, or at least some of the interviews were done before 2017, and we'll get into the New York Times article. So when you set out to make this, and I don't know about the exact timing, I'm assuming you started before 2017, based on some of the footage. Did you have any idea where this was heading in terms of the monumental disclosure that came about in December 2017?
Absolutely none. And we were 4.5 years in when that story broke on the front page of the New York Times. And it's funny, actually, because I actually made 3 previous films. I say 3.5 because we did a couple of versions of Out of the Blue. But, and kind of coincidentally, it takes me so long to make a movie, usually 4 to 6 years. Something inevitably happens, breaks news, UFO sighting, a case, maybe there's an effort for government transparency, something usually happens. And it had for the last 3 films I'd made. And I was talking to some of my co-producers, and they said, well, how are you going to end this movie? I said, well, I don't know. Probably there's going to be a a sighting that happens, and maybe we'll go and capture, the witnesses, and we'll see, And I knew something would happen, but I had no idea that there was going to be a secret UFO Pentagon program revealed on the front page of the New York Times.
And the film begins, or he's near the very beginning anyway. There's a kind of a teaser from Christopher Mellon, who is the former the former Assistant Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, with quite a revealing quote. Tell us a little bit about how you got Christopher Mellon on board and what he has to say.
So I was probably 3 to 4 years into the film when Lee Spiegel got on board. He wrote for the Huffington Post. I think he was one of the very few journalists paid to write about aerial phenomena. And he came on board and he brought Jacques Vallée on board. And Jacques is sort of the intellectual heavyweight on the topic of UFOs. His character was portrayed in Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Francois Truffaut. And Jacques, about a year and a half in, said, we might want to consider approaching Christopher Mellon. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, I don't know if Christopher Mellon is going to respond to my request, but he might respond to yours. So, of course, Jacques reached out to him. And Christopher Mellon literally said, when Jacques says jump, I respond, how high?
Interesting. And I think what's interesting is the level in terms of the higher ups and qualified people that are coming forward now. When you have a former Assistant Deputy Secretary for Defense Intelligence coming forward and speaking openly about this, that really indicates that the needle is being pushed forward, wouldn't you say?
Well, here's the thing that I've noticed with this production, and by the way, it took a village. Victor has been quietly working behind the scenes for. Victor, how long have you been helping me out, sending me information, clips? Over a decade.
Oh, easily, yes, for sure.
Yeah, he's been wonderful. It's like, I'm like, he sends me this treasure trove of stuff. I'm like, Victor, where did you find this? But honestly, it's taken a village, and what I've noticed with the phenomenon for the first time, and I'll remind your audience that this is my 4th film on the topic. I've been doing this for 26 years, is that I've never seen the level of interest with mainstream household names to watch the film, but not only that, publicly endorse it. And that I have not seen before at this level. So it's very exciting what's happening right now.
How do folks see or screen the phenomenon, James?
Well, there's a number of sites. We list them on our website. If you go to www.thephenomenonfilm.com, thephenomenonfilm.com. If you buy it, make sure you buy it from iTunes or Vimeo because it comes with 3 hours of bonus material for no extra cost. And of course, if you rent it, then rent it from wherever.
Okay, before I turn it over to Victor for a question, just give people a kind of a sense of how this is structured, because you do talk about the New York Times article that came out in December 2017, but you also give us kind of a crash course in the suppression of the UFO reality. Just explain a little bit.
Well, we were in the studio and we had this mantra, and our mantra was every day for, in the edit studio for the better part of 4 years, we would say, where are we going? And our response was road to Rua. And what we meant by that, we are going to end the film with what many consider the most compelling close encounter of the third kind in modern world history. And that is a landing case that happened in Rua, Zimbabwe at a school called Ariel School in 1994, where roughly 100 school children, 66 of which went on camera, claimed to have seen a landed object, disc-shaped, some claimed multiple objects, and occupants getting out and interacting with the children telepathically. So I knew that no one in their right mind was going to believe this incident happened if we were successful in sort of transcending the UFO community. Because I myself, when I first heard about it, actually, funny enough, through Steven Spielberg back in 1997, when I was just naive enough at the time to think I can get an interview with Steven Spielberg. And in 1997, he responded through our mutual friend, Janet, hey, I'm not going to let James interview me, but he should know about this landing case that happened in Africa. And that's the first time I heard of it. And I just quickly dismissed it because I said to myself, there's no way that a broad daylight encounter with the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony could occur and not the whole world have heard about it. And so I knew what we were up against if I was going to feel that way. So I had to do a fairly significant snapshot of history to build our case as to the likelihood of the event in Rua having taken place. And I think we succeeded.
Oh, yes, I'll say. And as we'll discuss later, you brought all of those witnesses together again, or some of them anyway, about 20 years later. And people can look forward to that in the film. Let me turn it over to my colleague, Victor Viggiani, for a question. Victor?
Yeah, actually, James, it's really kind of funny. You mentioned what you just said about Spielberg. You sort of make a point in the whole thing. You outline this huge historical chronology from the beginning till about the almost 7 or 8, 10, 15 minutes into the last part of the program, and you laid down what I call sort of Hansel and Gretel kind of chronology of all of the evidence you put forward, and then you hit the audience with the aerial school thing, and did you sort of set all that up so that people would say, oh my goodness, this aerial thing is kind of the denouement of everything, that no one's going to believe this unless they kind of deal with all of the issues that you raised both historically and currently, and then lead right into the aerial school for that part of the film.
I knew because of my personal reaction to it, and we cover another landing case that happened at a school in Westall, Australia in 1966. And when I first heard about that case, which there were well over 200 witnesses, again in broad daylight at a school, roughly 10 o'clock in the morning during recess, I just find it hard to imagine how an incident of that nature with so many witnesses in broad daylight could occur and the whole world not know about it. So I kind of knew what we were up against, and I kind of knew, not like I'm trying to go around prophesizing, getting people to join my cult of believers, because that's not what this is about. But I really wanted to kind of give a snapshot history that these things are real, they're intelligently controlled, and it's a global phenomenon, and they are landing, and there are credible reports of witnesses, reporting these beings associated with the craft.
James Fox is with us, along with Victor Viggiani. James's new film, The Phenomenon, you can go to thephenomenonfilm.com, and there are a number of ways you can watch it. You can also go to strangeplanet.ca and just click on the film title, and it'll take you right to thephenomenonfilm.com. You mentioned Jacques Vallée, who features prominently in The Phenomenon, and there's a passage in the documentary about Vallée and Dr. J. Allen Hynek from Project Blue Book, both testifying at the United Nations in 1978. And I don't want to give too much of the film away here, but there's a very important mention here of a letter that Vallée studied or discovered, I guess, among Dr. J. Allen Hynek's voluminous papers. A letter, he says, changed his life. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Dr. Vallée stumbled upon accidentally a top secret letter in Dr. Hynek's files, and I believe it was in the 60s. And he couldn't help himself but to read it. But what it revealed, Project Stork, it was basically a highly funded effort to investigate the phenomenon using all the instruments and tools strategically in high sighting areas to gather data. And it was a highly funded, super secret program that paralleled Project Blue Book, which basically illustrates the fact that Project Blue Book was nothing more than sort of a dog and pony show.
Right. And I believe that this discovery was, if I'm not mistaken, after the Condon report had basically said, enough is enough. We're done studying this.
I was so lucky, and again, I have to thank Lee Spiegel, who put on the United Nations event for bringing Jacques on board. But Jacques didn't just, read about this and study these aspects of the phenomenon, and the Condon report and Project Blue Book and Dr. Hynek's association in connection with the Air Force. He actually lived it, so to have him help us put together the pieces of the puzzle in a way that's never been done before was just such a boon to our production. I'll give you another example. Do we have time? Or
Yes, please.
Okay, so Jacques reluctantly kind of initially got involved at sort of arm's length, and he was going to just participate in one aspect of production, and that was covering the Rockefeller Initiative, because he was part of it. And when Jacques got more involved and started to see some of the cases that I had been spending many, many years investigating, one of which was the landing incident in Socorro, New Mexico, one of the most well-documented close encounters of the third kind in U.S. history, with Officer Lonnie Zamora, Jacques, became more and more intimately involved in the edit room, and he would come out for the weekends and he'd spend these marathon edit sessions with us. But he told me that he was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in April of 1964, and he was trying to tell Hynek, who was investigating scientific advisor to Project Blue Book, the Air Force, investigatory arm of UFOs, about cases that were explained away as psychological. And he was telling Hynek, look, you got to pay more closer attention to these cases. These cases are close encounters. They're happening in France. They're happening here in the United States. And he was really trying to get Hynek to take these more seriously. And literally 2 days after this meeting at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, Socorro happened. And so he saw, Dr. Hynek go to Socorro, meet the witness, see the evidence on the ground, and he saw sort of this transformation that happened with Dr. Hynek when it happened back in 1964. I mean, that's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. That I think that case that Hynek really realized that we were truly dealing with something, excuse the pun, out of this world.
I'm so glad you included the Socorro, New Mexico incident there, and you did such a wonderful job really putting some meat on them bones, because so often I find that case is kind of glossed over, but you talked to Lonnie's partner and you included some rare footage of when they went to investigate the site, and we see the imprint from the craft and so forth. You interviewed Lonnie's widow. So well done on Socorro, New Mexico. Let me just throw it over, Victor. We have time for a quick question before we break.
Yeah, I want to take off again once on the Lonnie Zamora case. I think you did something a little bit kind of different with respect to cataloging that event and then linking it to the Tic-Tac video, because the shape of the object that that Lonnie Zamora saw was very similar to the actual Tic-Tac video craft that the United States Navy pilots saw. So you kind of made those things a linked entity, didn't you?
Victor, that's a great observation. Very few people catch that. And I actually went as far as to look up when Tic-Tacs were invented. And I think it was like a year later, because I was like, well, if Tic-Tacs were invented earlier than that, then maybe Lonnie would have said it looked like a Tic-Tac as opposed to an egg, So no, it's a very, very interesting observation, and I definitely noticed that as well, because...
Well, I don't know if you're going to believe me, but I have in my notes, because I have it with the William Coleman sighting in 1955. I have that similar to it as well. I think there's a photo there which shows the craft sort of on its side as well. And there's also there's a photo, I believe it was from the gunship, from the F-18 with the Nimitz group, that showed a craft kind of on its side. And I thought those were similar. There's a lot of sort of similarities we're seeing when people describing these craft as being, metallic and just kind of shimmering and so forth, and appearing to be white against the blue sky. We're going to take a quick time out. James Fox stays with us. The Phenomenon is the documentary. Go to thephenomenonfilm.com to find out how to view it. And he and Victor and I will be back in one moment. Stay with us right here on The Conspiracy Show.
Is being pulled over your eyes. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To reach Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
Filmmaker, ufologist James Fox is with us. The Phenomenon is his new documentary. Thephenomenonfilm.com is where you go to view it. Victor Viggiani from Zealand News Network is here. And the other similarity I found was there was a photo taken in Arizona that you show in the film 2 weeks after the Kenneth Arnold sighting. And that also is very similar to a photo taken from, I believe, one of the gunship cameras from the U.S. Nimitz group, and in 2004. So that's kind of eerie. The other thing that struck me is, as you're building this wonderful sort of history, and we, in the late 1940s with United Airlines pilots and then other sightings, you describe it, or they described it in the newspaper headlines, as an armada or a fleet of discs. Often there's 9 of them flying in formation, and someone makes the point that it seemed almost like a deliberate show of force from these crafts. Talk to me about that.
Well, we went to great lengths because, the modern history of UFOs has been kind of beaten to death. But we went to great lengths to throw a new light, dig up never before seen archival footage, newsreel, interviews with well-known cases that are incredibly rare, and that took quite an effort. We have people to thank, like David Marler Archives in New Mexico, Tom Tullian. My sister Kelly. I mean, we unearthed stuff that the world has never seen before, because I really felt that it was important to not just show a headline, but if you could show a headline and then hear from the actual witness, that just really strengthens your case. And give an example, we obviously feature the infamous Kenneth Arnold 1947 UFO encounter. But we interview his daughter, Kim Arnold. So we get sort of the inside scoop of the impact it had on the family. And she shared with us correspondence between, Kenneth and the Air Force, photographs, originals that he kept, that the family kept since 1947, that we feature in the film. That really cool sighting that happened with United Airlines pilots William Nash and William Fortenberry in 1952, just before the White House and the Capitol building were buzzed in July. Really, really compelling eyewitness testimony, very unambiguous encounters that inescapable conclusion that it was like a show of force. And I think we even titled that section of the film as exactly that, because that's what it looked like. It looked like someone flexing their muscles.
Kenneth Arnold's daughter also revealed something I didn't know, and that was that in the aftermath of Kenneth Arnold's sightings, that generated more press interest than the end of the Second World War.
Yeah, no, he was very, very famous. He actually ran for lieutenant governor of Idaho.
Wow. All right, Victor, take it away.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of go back and forth on this because there's just so much in the film. We could discuss it for the next 2 hours. But let's go to Harry Reid for a second. And what really impressed me about your interview with Harry, with the former senator, was you got him in that room. He was sitting in a chair, and you were sitting opposite him for, I don't know exactly how long the whole interview took place, but there's a point at which you asked him a question. I'm not exactly sure what exactly the question was, if I can recall it, but the question was so really well pointed. You really drew him out really well, and he was kind of taken aback. So he waits for a second, picks up a glass of water, takes a sip of water, then looks you in the eye, and then answers your question and drops a bombshell on your lap. And that, to me, was just so genuine, the way you handled the interview with a former senator who knows exactly what's going on and the pressure he was under to bring it forward.
Oh, that was one of the bombshell moments of the whole production, and there were a handful of those moments, believe me. But that was probably, if not number one, it's probably number one. I gotta back up for a moment. That interview came about after months of negotiations. George Knapp was pulling strings behind the scenes. In fact, there were a couple of people pulling strings behind the scenes, and it was a small window that opened, and we just managed to get that interview. And I was gobsmacked. I mean, we set up the whole scene because he was like, okay, I'm going to have 53 minutes. I'll arrive, we'll sit down, we'll do the interview, then I've got to go. And he showed up, he had a whole entourage, he had security detail. The guy looked like, like I didn't get too close, Senator Reid, without looking at him to make sure it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was like. This guy was looking at me like, don't even, So I was concerned about pushing the envelope. I was concerned about going beyond his comfort level.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it was about 40 minutes into the interview. I knew I had about 10 more minutes. He was going pretty far. I was amazed at what he was revealing. And I decided, because I'd heard from people like David Fravor and George Knapp and a handful of others, that what was released on the front page of the New York Times, evidence-wise, was just the tip of the iceberg. And so I decided to kind of breach that topic. And I was reminiscing, and I told him about an interview that I'd done with Gordon Cooper, Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper, back in the 90s. And Gordon had shared with me a couple of instances, but one in particular was about this alleged landing at Edwards Air Force Base that his film crew had documented on camera of a flying saucer that landed on the dry lake bed in broad daylight circa 1957 at Edwards Air Force Base. He wasn't a witness, but his crew brought him the film footage. He had it developed. He held it up to see if it was good footage. It was. And all the while he was in contact with the higher ups in Washington. Eventually a courier jet came in to pick it up, and he handed the footage over. And I was telling this story to Senator Reid. And just when I got to the point where I said yes, and he told me on camera that he handed the footage over to this, people that came in from Washington, and Senator Reid said, and it was never seen or heard from again. And I went, exactly. And then he tried to change the topic. He was like, he was going somewhere else. And I was like, well, hold on. Senator, are you saying that, there's some evidence that hasn't seen the light of day? And it was like time had stopped. And
wow.
Honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd pushed the limit, if I'd just gone beyond his comfort level. I really didn't know. And what seemed like several minutes, I'm sure it was just a moment, he picked up his water bottle,
right,
took the cap off, and he had a sip. And he put the cap back on, and he said, I'm saying that most of the evidence hasn't seen the light of day. And wow, that was a level of confirmation people in the field had suspected for a long time, but to have someone of his level, I mean, one of the second most powerful men in the U.S., I mean, he was Senate Majority Leader, to confirm it was huge.
With regards to the Cooper footage, there's a piece in the documentary, The Phenomenon, that where we sort of found out what supposedly happened to that footage. Didn't Cooper speak to or sit in on a cabinet meeting with Defense Secretary Cohen at the time, and Cohen?
Yeah, really funny.
Yeah,
really
tell us about that.
Because when I met with our former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Reid, try saying that quickly 10 times, in Washington, D.C., we were sort of, talking while the camera crews were setting up. And lo and behold, I was telling him about my meeting with Gordon Cooper. And he goes, "Oh, my gosh, really? You met with him?" I said, "Yeah, I interviewed him in the 90s. And he was telling me about his footage." He goes, "You're kidding me. You got him on camera?" I said, "Yeah, no, I did." He goes, "Well, he came into the White House and he told the story to President Clinton when Clinton was kind of going after this stuff." And so I was put in charge of, in an official capacity, to go after that landing footage. I said, "You're kidding me." He goes, "No, I was doing it in the 90s. I said, "Shoot, right around the same time I was interviewing Gordon Cooper, you were, And he said that eventually he got in touch with a high-level Air Force guy who basically said, "Oh, we had to clean up, we had to make space and, throw all that stuff out." Of course, Chris had a totally incredulous look on his face, like, "Yeah, right, you're going to throw away landing footage of a flying saucer and Edwards Air Force Base." Like, sure. But yeah, they were not successful in getting their hands on that. But apparently it's there.
It's still there. Wow.
Yeah, that's what Senator Reid. Oh yeah, Senator Reid said, "Yeah, that stuff's all there. It's there." I mean, look, he said the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the tip of the iceberg. What you've seen is just the tip of the iceberg. So we have a call to action at the end of the movie because, you can't explain away this phenomenon as swamp gas and weather balloons and misidentified aircraft to an educated population. And that's what I really hope this film will do, because it's going to be much more difficult for them to provide a nonsense explanation or say, we don't have this stuff, which we will just know that it's not the case.
All right, James, we're going to take another time out. Stay put. You too, Victor.
Where there's smoke, there's The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. James Fox stays with us. The Phenomenon is his latest documentary, and you can go to thephenomenonfilm.com, thephenomenonfilm.com, and there are a number of ways to view it. But if you go through iTunes or Vimeo, there's some bonus material there that you'll get as well. And of course, Victor Viggiani from Zealand News Network stays with us. Victor, over to you.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of raise there's sort of joined issues here, James. Senator Reid brings up, like as you mentioned earlier, a really visceral reaction to your question about the film and just the overall impact of really what's going on with the whole issue. And Robert Salas, we should talk about this for sure before the end, with the nuclear implications with UFOs and all of that. I guess my overall question to you would be, when you get people like this coming forward of such gravitas and such, basic knowledge, how and when do you think mainstream scientists are going to take this issue up and bring it forward as a real issue in mainstream science? How far down the road do you think that is, and will it ever even happen?
Well, having witnessed what Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée are doing in a lab in Silicon Valley, and that they're waiting to make any more concrete announcements or analysis prior to peer review and being published in a scientific journal, I think to me is very exciting, because that's exactly what they're pushing for, is for the scientific community to take a closer look at the phenomenon. And I think it's very exciting what's happening. And also, I'm seeing, just the other night, I got a call from Scotland, and there was an astronomer and a physicist that wanted to see if it was okay if they played the film at a school and at a conference, which I thought was rather encouraging. That you had sort of these mainstream scientists that normally poo-poo stuff on this phenomenon, asking if they could use this film as an educational tool to bring on more scientists in the field. So that was very encouraging. I really think that we are rapidly approaching the tipping point with this. And I think people like, Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and Harry Reid, the New York Times, and a handful of others have made a lot of progress and made a huge difference in the last couple of years.
James, you mentioned Vallee's work with Nolan in Silicon Valley, and this has to do with exotic materials that Vallee has collected over the years, reportedly from UFO crash sites. They're analyzing this stuff at an atomic level. Can you share a few of their findings?
So I'm not a scientist, but yes, they are cautious in what they will say publicly, but preliminary results indicate material that was engineered at an atomic level, engineered in a way that would be nearly impossible by what they could tell, and that before they make any more concrete statements, they're going to have the analysis published in a scientific journal and get peer review. But it's very, very exciting. Let's put it that way.
Let's go to the nuclear issue, James, because if I ever get into
I got a fun thing to tell you about that one.
For sure. Well, it's really there is really so much to it. You take off on it, because I think anyone who watches the film will eventually get to the point where I think you'll probably say this. These things are entering our airspace with impunity and hovering over nuclear installations and doing things, turning things on and off. Nuclear weapons.
Yeah, so
this has to be something really, really special here in the film.
So here's how it came about in the film. We cover this fairly extensively. I was probably about 6 years into production, maybe 6.5. And a very good friend, a co-editor, this guy Lance Mungia, and he said to me, James, all these reports and these landings and the stuff at Holloman, White Sands, and Coro, and Texas, we should get a map, and we should put a little pin in these different locations and just kind of take a look at what's going on here. So I thought, that's a good idea. So we did. And what I started to see was that the proximity to the Trinity site, which is the first detonation of the atomic bomb back in 1945, to all these sightings. I mean, literally, they were like all around the area. And I just, I was just kind of shocked. Like, wow, there's got to be a correlation here. Well, right around the same time, I managed to get that interview, we were talking about earlier, with Senator Harry Reid. And we did the whole interview, with 47 minutes into it. And I said, Senator, and I knew he was on a very rigorous schedule. I knew we only had a couple more minutes. And I really wanted to get a shot of him and I walking and talking for B-roll that I just might need. So I asked him, I said, Senator, would you mind before you leave, I would just get a really quick, shot of us walking and talking. And he knew what I needed to do. He said, well, sure, let's do it. I looked over to the photographer and I said, look, don't worry about it. We don't have time to get lighting. It is what it is. Just get a couple quick shots. So I figured while I was walking with him, I might as well take advantage of my time. And I asked him, Senator, thank God I asked him this question. I don't know why I didn't ask it when we were sitting down, but I didn't. I said, Senator, what was one of the more astonishing aspects that you guys uncovered as part of the ATIP program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program at the Pentagon for that 10-year period. And he sort of paused and he looked at me and he said, the fact that they're interacting with our nuclear weapons. And then he said, he went as far as saying that there were a couple of cases he knew about that if the President of the United States wanted to launch, they couldn't have done it. These things were just not only making incursions over these super sensitive nuclear weapons facilities, but they were shutting these things off. And I knew right then and there, okay, I got to address this. I kind of had an inkling. I had heard about it before. I mean, I covered a little bit about this, the Vandenberg Air Force Base case.
So are you. To The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free 1-866-740-4740.
The Phenomenon director James Fox is here for a few moments yet, and then after the top of the hour, into the second hour, Victor Viggiani will stay with me and we'll continue to talk about the film, which we've both recently screened, and all things disclosure. James, you mentioned and Victor were talking about the nuclear sites that were taken offline, places like Ellsworth Air Force Base and Minot Air Force Base, Malmstrom in 1967. As it turns out, on the other side of the Cold War, you had something similar happening, except in this case, in one case in particular, in Ukraine at a nuclear base, these UFOs were launching the signal was being triggered, so they were turning them off in the United States and seemingly turning them on in Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was long-winded on the last explanation because I kind of wanted your audience to hear the evolution of my thought process on this topic, because I wouldn't have probably highlighted it had it not been for the map during documenting some of these sightings back in the 50s and 60s, and even flyovers in the 40s. But my meeting with Senator Harry Reid, and then of course Robert Hastings, UFOs and Nukes, made all of his lifelong investigations, decades after decade, available to us for the film. So we put together a very poignant 8 to 10 minute section of testimony of people claiming that firsthand eyewitness accounts of these UFOs not only being seen, picked up on radar, but in most cases, turning the UFOs off, but in some cases, both in the U.S. and in Russia. We know about this thanks to the research that George Knapp has done in 1993. It's crazy because, Robert Salas, who's a launch control officer, colonel in the United States Air Force, I'll never forget what he said to me. He was like, well, what does it tell you? To me, it's like taking matches out of the hands of a baby.
All right, Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to, before we leave, James, you've gone through this whole exercise, and you said it just takes 6 or 7 years or whatever the length. What is the finality of this particular film? I know you've done the others. I know what I've seen, and Out of the Blue. What has this particular production taken out of you? What kind of impact has it had on you, both physically and emotionally and spiritually? What has this exercise done to you? I know you have some comments on that.
I don't want to sound melodramatic, but
not at all.
I honestly felt like I was going to die about 7 years into it, maybe 6.5. I was pushed so hard. The best way I can describe it it's like being in the ring with a monster, and you're just trying to survive the next round. And it's relentless because you can't punch out the clock and go home. It stays with you 24/7 for nearly 8 years. And there were so many hurdles. Just doing a documentary is hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
But if I told your audience the hurdles that I encountered along the way, we'd be here for 9 hours.
Can you give us a taste of one of those hurdles? James, can you give us a taste of one of those hurdles that you faced?
I'm here. Yeah. You've got everything from disgruntled partners, running out of money, people trying to stop production for whatever their motivations are, litigation. I think I mentioned the financial side.
Mm-hmm.
Just getting people to go on camera. I mean, I could write a book on what it took just to get the Rua section of this film, which is only under 10 minutes together. That took 5 years. Not just editing, but negotiations and raising the funds and flying in the witnesses, working with people like Randall Nickerson, working with executive producers, trying to coordinate all the schedules, dealing with the John Mack Institute. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, I spent 5 years getting to know Socorro, New Mexico. I got to know Manu's family. I got to know his daughter Diane, his wife Mary, his son Michael. I got to know his coworkers, the local police officer. I mean, I was in and out of that town for 5 years. In fact, I went even bought their truck, the family truck, which I have now back in California. It just took a lot of time. I mean, I spent a week with Ray Stanford. He wrote the book Flying Saucer and Pentagon Pantry. Anyway, he wrote the definitive book on the topic of Socorro, New Mexico. I mean, there's just there's a backstory with every case, and it was just a monumental task to get this film done. And look, it's my fourth attempt to create a body of evidence that could be presented to mainstream, because I feel like this is a topic that there's enough credible information that every man, woman, and child should have the right to know about. And putting that together in a digestible, palatable way is incredibly challenging. And just making a documentary is incredibly challenging. But then trying to make a documentary on a topic, that's been shunned by the scientific community and the mainstream media for 75 years. I mean, It's incredibly difficult. And so, I wouldn't wish what I went through upon my worst enemy. I don't say that like I didn't have fun as well, but it was incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult.
It's like marriage, James. Things are tough at the best of times.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, listen, I'm really glad. I'm really happy. It's one of the first times that I finished a film and I patted myself on the back and said, I like this one. I'm happy.
Wow.
The manifestation of this is how I envisioned it wanting to be from concept to completion. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And any plans to get this into the hands of elected officials?
Oh, that's already going on big time. Oh yeah, there's a lot. There's so much going on behind the scenes right now. You guys, it's unbelievable. I mean, look, Lou Elizondo publicly endorsed this. He was director of the program for ATIP at the Pentagon. Christopher Mellon, I mean, they're using it as an educational tool. Senator Harry Reid, I mean, everybody's endorsing it publicly and they're spreading the word like crazy. Absolutely. This is not going to be a flash in the pan, like, this is a marathon that we're running right now. This is just, as Senator Reid said, the tip of the iceberg.
And it's this, with disclosure, it's like people have been kicking in the door, and it seems like it's just I get the sense hanging by a few splinters. What are those splinters? What's the main obstacle that remains in your mind?
I think that from people that I've talked to that are in a position to sort of do a lot more, it's one of the reasons why we put a call to action at the end of the movie. Representatives need to hear from their constituents. They need to hear that, hey, the water's okay. We're not going to castigate you for putting your neck out on a topic that's generally not considered worthy of serious investigation. I think that's changing. And I think that the more we, the people, reach out to our representatives and say, hey, we want to know more. We know there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. We want to push for transparency. I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see congressional hearings. I think that would certainly do it. Christopher Mellon said that there's supposed to be an evaluation, a report that's supposed to be made public about an assessment, really, as to what's going on. That's due at any moment. And I know that Mr. Mellon is working hard behind the scenes and getting that out. So I'm very, very optimistic, more so than I've ever been, times 100, times 1,000, quite honestly. Mm-hmm. So I think I really believe that we are at a tipping point.
Live from Toronto, Canada, Earth, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Thanks for inviting me into your home. Long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed rec room with a simulated wood paneling, electric fireplace, and the painting of dogs playing poker, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Victor Viggiani from Zealand News Network stays with me. James Fox, ufologist, filmmaker, director of The Phenomenon, has left us, but Victor and I will carry on this hour discussing the film and UFO disclosure in general. Before I get back to Victor, just a reminder that if you enjoy The Conspiracy Show, check out my podcast, Conspiracy Unlimited. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Go to conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com, conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com to listen and subscribe. The most recent 30 episodes are free. You can become a premium subscriber for less than $2 a month US, and that'll give you access to the back catalog, which is over 430 episodes. Plus, you get 2 commercial-free episodes per month. And to become a premium subscriber, go to conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com and click on Gain Access to Premium Episodes, and you can sign up. All right, Victor is back again, the executive director of Zealand Communications and Zealand News Network, and a retired school principal from Toronto, has been studying anomalous aerial phenomena for over 30 years. His experience involves UFO sightings, report investigation, counseling work with individuals reporting anomalous experiences, presentations and journalisms in the field of ETI disclosure issues. Victor, welcome back, and thanks for hanging out for the full 2 hours.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Richard, to be with you. And take off on the last hour. My goodness, where do we go from there?
I'd like to, go back over some of the things that we touched on, and maybe in a little bit more detail. One of the things I mentioned that Jacques Vallée uncovering that letter in Dr. J. Allen Hynek's vast library of documents, and I guess Hynek didn't even realize he had it, but this was that letter that supposedly changed Vallée's life, and it revealed this, and James Fox, he touched on it, but he didn't go into too much detail, and I won't either, except to say that this letter revealed what can only be described as an ultra-secret government investigation into UFOs. It was unknown to all but a few. And it indicated, I think it was Battelle Memorial Institute,
Right.
where they were studying these exotic metals. It was someone, I think his name was H.L. Cross, was studying these exotic metals and basically, concluding they were not likely of this world. I mean, I can see how that letter would change his life.
Well, when you look at the kind of research that was done on those metals, the doctor, what was his name? No, the last name was Nolan, I believe it was. What they found is that these exotic materials, for lack of a better word, exhibited ratios of isotopes. And I'm not a physicist at all, but I mean, I'm looking at what the findings were. The isotope ratios did not make any sense when they analyzed everything to the very, very basic particulate matter of what these particles were. It's something that they'd never found before, and it also leads into the argument, or at least the perspective of the Tsar. He found this element 115. Now, the question is, what's the relationship between what Bob Lazar found with element 115 and the isotopic anomalies that Dr. Nolan found? If this material is in fact unknowable on our planet, or even in any part of our own solar system, that to me indicates that whoever has sort of made these craft of unknown origin crash, and then us find what these things are made of, it's an indication that we are finding out who and what these people or these beings are all about. I think that's what it points to. I mean, you can examine the particles and go for days and days and days to examine what these things are. But what the fact of the matter is, it points to the fact that we have craft of unknown origin coming from someplace else, either in our own solar system or our own cosmos someplace, or, lack of a better word, interdimensional. I don't want to get into that just yet. But if this material is not of any known substance that we have, and we're extending the periodic table into materials that we don't know about, what does that say about what this issue is all about? You can't deny the fact that whatever these craft are, call them UFOs, UAP, they are definitely not from here. And extending that argument, mainstream scientists have to admit that we have to find out a bit more about that and shed this whole notion of, well, this can't possibly happen. Well, it is happening, and it's here. It's right in our lap. And, Jacques Vallée as someone who spurred my interest in all of this, Richard. I know back in 1975, I was at a Coles bookstore up in Barrie, Ontario, just browsing, and I picked up his book, and I don't know why I did it. My wife was shopping, doing something else, and I was browsing. I went into the store, and I saw this book, Revelations by Jacques Vallée. I had no idea what that book was or meant, and I picked it up, and I read the foreword to it, and I said, my goodness, this sounds really interesting. And this is 1975. And then from there, I brought that book back home, back to the cottage, and I read it during the summer. I read the book, Richard, 4 times. I couldn't digest it all in just 1 or 2 readings. So Jacques Vallée has done something here. He's brought forward a whole new realm of understanding about what this exotic material might be. And who knows where this is going to lead us in terms of what mainstream science could do to propel some sort of acknowledgement that these craft are not from here. And where do we go with that information? What do we do with it? And how will the general public understand it?
Right. You mentioned Dr. Nolan, and this is the analyzing of these exotic materials that's going on right now in Silicon Valley with Dr. Vallée and Dr. Nolan. And these are materials that Vallée has collected over the years from alleged UFO crash sites. And I think Nolan referred to them as ultra material. Right. And you're right. Again, I'm not a physicist, certainly, and I don't even play one on the radio, but I think he mentioned something like evidence that there is evidence of 253 different isotopes contained in these materials, whereas we use about 83.
That's right.
83 isotopes, so 253. So again, the conclusion was manufactured, not natural. Not necessarily off planet, but still manufactured, not natural.
Right.
Other points in the film, in the phenomenon that really kind of shook you up.
Well, sitting through the whole thing the first time that I've seen Out of the Blue, and I saw James's film, I Know What I Saw, and they were excellent. They were in so many different ways just riveting. But with this particular film, and the way it struck me was, and listening to how James put things together over time. We spent some time on a group interview on Facebook with Grant Cameron about 3 weeks ago. There was about 6 or 7 people involved in this, and Grant put this together. And it was the first time, I think, that James had a chance to really kind of expound very, very informally on what he had done. And it was very instructive for me to see not only the depth to which James had gone to put this all together, but the physical toll and the mental and the emotional toll it took on him. And what it showed me was that he has dipped his finger into an inkwell that, and the stain of which it's not going to ever be removed. He will be placed in history, and I can guarantee you that this particular film will set a benchmark for anyone who has any kind of interest in finding out what this issue is all about. And not just the people who have a deep interest in it, there is so much there for them too, but it's also a benchmark for people who, can you imagine putting this in the hands of someone who knows nothing about the issue, or getting a good journalist who has an inquisitive nature and say, would you have a look at this and see where you want to go with it? This phenomenon, this film, The Phenomenon, could be a real head whip for a lot of people to find out that there's much more to this. And somebody out there, some people, some level of species out there is doing things that we just don't understand. And the sooner we come to grips with the fact that this is actually happening, and we move it into the mainstream science and mainstream journalism, the better people will understand that they've got to move away from the kitchen table and stop absorbing some of the information that's being foisted on them about the regular reality that we're in, and they have to remove themselves from that reality. And I've done that over the course of my investigations. I continuously remove myself from the reality that I'm in. And we have to do that to a certain point. This sounds very esoteric and everything, but if you keep on thinking along the same lines all of the time, you put yourself in a straitjacket. Eventually, you have to, if you have any kind of inquisitive nature to yourself at all, you have to move beyond what our emotional and physical and neurological confinement does to our own reality. And move beyond that. And once you move beyond that and begin to accept the fact that there are things going on beyond our reality, that's the key. Is understanding that our reality is not the total sum of all realities. Now, has the phenomenon moved us towards that? I think it has. It's done it in a way that's informational. It's done it in a way that's factual. It's done it in a way that's extremely emotional. I would dare anyone to watch the last 20 minutes of that film with respect to the area school children, and now as adults, what they went through. These children were standing 1 meter from beings from another world. Like, how do you internalize that kind of information, and what does it mean to us? And if it just becomes something as, well, it's the same thing as crossing the street against a red light or whatever, I mean, you really don't get the fact that this is important. But if you internalize the fact that some of these children, 2 or 3 of them, actually said they stood 1 meter from a being from another world, I mean, Richard, what does that mean? That's a question that.
And for those maybe joining us later not familiar with the aerial school in Zimbabwe, this was in 1994. And you had, I believe, there were something like 66 children who witnessed this, and some teachers. And these craft, they landed in the schoolyard or adjacent to the schoolyard. Entities got out, as you say. Some children were a meter, which is like 3.5 feet, less than 3.5 feet away, staring into their eyes. And then James Fox did something quite remarkable. He brought those students, a number of them together again, 20 years later, to recount what they had seen. And again, they were adamant. Their story didn't change at all. You could tell that they're very emotional. I think after looking at this movie, this documentary, The Phenomenon, it's, for someone who's not familiar with the issue, it's really the only documentary you need to see. I think James did such a great job he did 2 things. He brought everything together in an hour and a half that gives you this crash course in the UFO issue since 1947 to the present day. But at the same time, for those of us that are a little more immersed in the issue, there was a lot of new stuff there too. I wasn't aware, for example, of the 1959 Papua New Guinea case, where a missionary saw this craft along with 38 other witnesses. And there's enough of that in the film for diehards, and even better known cases like the Socorro, New Mexico case. As I mentioned to James, he did a great job on putting some meat on them bones, because that's a case that kind of gets glossed over typically when it's covered. But he interviewed Socorro's wife, Larry's wife, the deputy that saw it, the craft that landed. He interviewed his partner. We actually go to the landing site. We see raw footage. I hadn't seen that footage before, where we see the imprint the craft made when it touched down. Had you seen that footage before?
No, I haven't. That's totally new to me.
Right.
And,
have you ever heard from Lonnie Zamoro's wife before?
Well, not in the depth that James did. You're exactly right, Richard. He's got to some things that even some of the more astute UFO researchers and historians, they're shaking their heads and asking the question, where did he get some of this stuff? I mean, this is he's got footage of James McDonald, a scientist who was ridiculed severely. He's got tape and film of him actually on film saying certain things that I've never heard before. So anyone who has any doubt about the severity and the intrusiveness and the authenticity of this film, if you've got any doubts about it, watch it, and you will be totally convinced that what James Fox did was absolutely incredibly incisive and research beyond the pale. Absolutely. The Papua New Guinea case, for people who are not familiar with it, there's a small school. I'm not sure exactly how many children were involved, but there was a missionary there with several children. There could have been up to 25 or 30. They were standing on the shore, and they saw this craft hover out over the water. It was a large craft, had lights on around the side, and then it came in so close that the children actually saw four beings, standing around the outside, or at least within windows within this craft. They actually saw the beings in the craft hovering over the water.
Yes, and it's or on top, perhaps even on top of the craft.
Exactly. Now, you've got a missionary, a man of the cloth, so to speak. Why would this fellow bring forward something like that if it wasn't something true? And absolutely true, true, with children? There's no reason for him to fabricate this kind of information. So James has done a great job in bringing these things to the forefront, and not only bringing them to the forefront, but putting them in a really incredible historical context that leads us up to the current state of affairs with, the Tic-Tac videos and the ATIP program and, Harry Reid and all of that. What he does, he's connected the dots so much more authentically than anything that I've ever seen before in my experience. It's just, he hit the ball right out of the park.
I would agree. We're going to continue to talk about the film, but also we'll talk about disclosure in general, and we'll also open up the phone lines, and we'll make those available to listeners right now. 416-360-0740. That's in the Greater Toronto Area. 416-360-0740. And toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4740. 1-866-740-4740. We were talking about some of these landings, UFO landings in near schools, and the other one was Westall, right, which is in Australia. This happened in 1966, and again, a number of witnesses. These were, I believe, older children, if I'm not mistaken, than the children at the aerial school in Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. Interesting segment, though, in the film where a science teacher who had never come out publicly and spoken before finally spoke out, wished to remain anonymous, but had an interesting story to tell. Do you remember that episode?
Yeah, the interesting part of that, it was 1966, I believe. And I believe the number of students, we're talking several hundred students at this point. And this is the way the James characterized it. And the actual witnessing of what went on was so enthralling that these children were affected to an emotional state. And I've done some, talking to people in Australia because I spent some time there. The children that saw this, that witnessed this, they're adults now, of course, as back in 1966. They were so emotionally distraught and completely perplexed by what went on. There's a lot of I'm not going to call it mental illness. There wasn't, but some of these people went into almost like an emotional cascade failure because they couldn't understand what they were seeing and why they were seeing it, the craft that they saw. And then, as you said, the teacher that came forward, he was also extremely ridiculed at the time for even bringing it forward. And then he shut up. He just stopped talking about it. He didn't want to deal with it. He couldn't deal with it. But at some point, I'm not sure exactly how far it was along into his career or after he retired, he decided to come forward. And he dealt with it. He brought some closure to it. So this kind of stuff that happens on a personal level, and to me, as a former educator and a principal of schools, I can well appreciate the kind of impact that this would have had on a school community. I mean, I've been a principal of a school, with 500 children in it, and you have the.
Passcodes, social insurance numbers. If they make you wonder how private they are, here's two more numbers. 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
We're back with Victor Viggiani from Zealand News Network and Zealand Communications. We're talking about James Fox's latest film, The Phenomenon. James joined us earlier for the first hour. And people can screen that. Go to thephenomenonfilm.com, thephenomenonfilm.com, or go to strangeplanet.ca, and under tonight's show information, you'll see the film listed there. Just click on that. That'll link right to the website, thephenomenonfilm.com. We were talking about the Westall 1966 UFO incident in Australia.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that science teacher who finally, for the first time, spoke out publicly after holding this in for 54 years. And you were wondering, as a former educator, a retired school principal, how difficult that must have been. But he was, I believe, visited by a couple of Air Force officials who warned him that if he ever spoke out about it, he would be reported as a drunk. They were going to concoct some story, and they would get him fired right quick. Do you remember that?
Yes, he was very clearly told that he should not talk about this again, and they actually accused him of being drunk, according to what the James's film said. And what I guess it points to, Richard, is the fact that whatever the security networks that are in place are, and what they have control over, are so insidious that they could reach down into a community like that, go to a school, sit down with a teacher and say, you did not see what you saw, and if you do come forward to say what you saw, we will discredit you to a point where you will have nothing left in your career. Now, how insidious is that? And this is not the first time this has ever happened. This happens with, in my conversations with Robert Salas, the nuclear installation launch commander. And, Bob and I have a very close relationship. And the depth of concern that he's expressed continuously about what happened to not only him, but to his security guards and to everybody else who's been a part of the witnessing of UFOs over nuclear installations, and how government officials have forced these Air Force officials to just stay quiet. It is absolutely mind-boggling the extent to which the national security element within the United States government is so in control of this, or they think they are so in control of it, that people are afraid for incarceration, loss of their pensions, and just personal discreditation. So the level of negativity surrounding this makes sure that this stuff does not get out, and they've done a pretty good job of it, really.
Well, you're right. It's one thing for someone in the military to be told not to talk about it, but I think it was in the Westall school case in '66 in Australia. The children were called into an assembly. I don't know if there were any sort of military type officials there, but they were certainly told by their teachers, you didn't see anything and you're not to talk about it.
Right.
You didn't see anything and you're not to talk about it, which is kind of
I could just imagine
dichotomy.
I can just imagine me as I've held many assemblies in my days at school, gathering together 500 children in the gym and saying, okay, folks, you didn't see what you saw, and here's how we're going to handle that. I cannot imagine myself being put in that kind of position, both knowing what I know now and even knowing what I know then. I would have jumped up and down and had the media there at the school to interview every single child. I don't know, but that's just me.
All right, let's go to the phones, and Skip is joining us from Connecticut. Skip, welcome.
Yeah, hi. Very interesting discussions. I have two questions. One would be the premise that all this unfolded to where the government has a monopoly on this information, like that idea of, tip of the iceberg. It's got, that would almost indicate that these beings are communicating with our government and they're not telling us. And the second thing, the fact that there's been some crash sites tells me it's probably not coming from interstellar space. If the crash were that superstar, they wouldn't crash, I believe.
Yeah, you've hit two nails right on the head. Let's deal with the first one. Your first point was regarding government knowledge of this. Let's move that forward a little bit. And James does approach this issue in the film. Most of us feel that, or a lot of researchers and people in the general public feel that this is a government military issue within the United States government. But I think within the film, and other researchers have said this, that gradually over time, for some reason and somehow, the United States government has done a soft handoff to corporate entities, to private sector corporations, to give them information or allow them to be exposed to certain levels of declassified and classified information, so that this information is now in the private sector. And in a very gingerly soft way, government is kind of backing off a little bit on this, leaving it in the private sector and allowing for the private sector to move this stuff forward. Now, I talk about Robert Bigelow, we're talking about the Rand Corporation, General Electric, Johnson Control Systems. These are all corporations who have been given information about this stuff. And that allows the American government to take a step back and say, well, we really don't know what's going on. It's all in the private sector, which leads to the point of, plausible deniability in terms of acknowledgement or disclosure, which we'll get into later on. Now, your second point regarding crashes, to me, it indicates that some of these civilizations or some of these craft or some of these entities are in some way vulnerable, or they have weaknesses just like we do. If these craft are as sophisticated as some people say they shouldn't be crashing. But something about either their composition or the electromagnetic systems around our planet, or some dysfunction within their own craft, are causing them to crash. And you have to ask the question, why? And where are the crashes? What happens to them, and what happens to the bodies? So these are all unanswered questions that I think that either the government has to eventually come forward on, or the corporations have to deal with it, because they have somehow commandeered some of the materials, as Rich and I were talking about earlier. There's a whole lot of unanswered questions around all of this, and that's why I think the journalistic community should really kind of step up their act and get into finding out why this is happening.
Skip, thank you for the call. You're right. And, newspapers everywhere are failing. They are trying to come up with some sort of a business model, whether it's paying for content online, which is going nowhere after
Right.
people have had free content for decades. Now they expect people to pay. That's not going to happen. This might be their answer, is to start paying attention to this issue and writing about it and employing some of the same journalistic practices they apply to City Hall and the provincial budget to this very issue. I'm serious. I mean,
Richard,
the readership would explode.
Richard, please do not get me going on this one, okay? This is something that's a stone in my shoe, not a pebble in my shoe. It's a stone in my shoe. We can see that the newsprint industry is collapsing. Everybody knows that. The Toronto Star, the National Post, they're all posting things, boost up and solid journalism. Give us the credit we're due. What they're doing is hiding behind a facade of how can I put it? I'm not going to call it fake news, because it's not fake news. It's fabricated news. There's a difference between fake news and fabricated news. And we talk about all the things that are going on that are so ephemeral in their effects on us on a daily basis, that if they were to choose some really key writers and have them spend 3 months investigating this stuff, these newspapers could publish online and both in newsprint. They could publish articles that would change the public mind within 3 to 4 weeks on this issue. And I'm not exaggerating. There's so much out there.
Yeah, and there's enough going on that they could dine out on it. They could fill an entire front section of the newspaper, or have a separate section of the newspaper. They could have assign someone that is their beat. You have a Queen's Park bureau. You could have a UFO bureau. Well, if they're smart, just simply from a profit motive, they should be looking at that. Let's go to the YouTube chat. Solar Warden asks, are you familiar with the sighting of Chris Gibson in the North Sea of the black triangular craft in 1989 while working on an oil rig? He was Royal Naval Corps observer. Thoughts on the Chris Gibson sighting?
and letting you draw your own conclusions. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
416-360-0740 in the Greater Toronto Area, 416-360-0740, toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4740, 1-866-740-4740. And I neglected to mention, for those of you who have assembled in the YouTube chat, please, your questions, if you have, and my live stream producer Ryan will forward those on to me. Let's go to the phones, and I believe it's Kathy in St. Catharines. Kathy, welcome.
Hi, gentlemen. I've got two questions. The first is, when these UFOs appeared at the schools in Africa and Australia, did they try to kidnap any of the children? And second, do you think God was a space alien?
All right, Victor. To my knowledge, there were no attempted abductions of the children, although several children in the Ariel school in Zimbabwe in '94, it seems to be they hinted at some telepathic communication, and they felt like they were being sort of invited to go with them, but there was no one taken by force.
Well, thanks for your questions, Kathy. Excellent question. Let's take the Ariel school to begin with. My experience with that has been very direct, because I spent 3 days with Dr. John Mack at his office in the Harvard School of Psychiatry in 1996. I went down there, and I had reason to go down, which is another case altogether. But in his assessment and his interaction with the children, he went down there and interviewed, I'm not sure how many, I think he interviewed 7 or 8 of the children. None of them ever alluded to the fact that they were taken aboard ships, experienced missing time or anything like that. This happened all in real time. None of the children actually expressed any kind of indication that they were taken. However, as Richard just said, 2 or 3 of them, when interviewed by Dr. John Mack, were very, very specific. And we're talking young children here, okay? That when John Mack asked them the question, how did you interact with these beings? Did you talk to them? And they said no. And then John Mack asked, well, how did they talk to you? And without question, the children, 3 of the children respond, in my mind. And John didn't try to lead them. We said, well, what do you mean in your mind? I just received words in my mind about us not taking care of the planet, and that we have to take care of the planet better, and that our technology is taking over, and that we have to be careful with the technology. And he kept on asking them, how did you get this information? And it was through some sort of telepathic communication. But John never found out any information indicating that these children were taken. So that's my response to your the first part of your question. The second part, do I think that God is an extraterrestrial?
I'll take that one.
How long was a piece of string, Kathy? You go right ahead, Richard. Take that one.
Well, yeah. I mean, he is of extraterrestrial origin. He is not of this world, but he's not an alien, if that's what you mean. I don't subscribe to the ancient alien theory myself. But there's some discussion as to whether in the Catholic Church it seems to have held open the possibility that if there are extraterrestrials, they are part of God's creation, so that there's nothing anti-biblical or that necessarily argues against the biblical narrative in order to believe in extraterrestrials. But I don't believe that God is an ET or Jesus is an ET, except that they are not of this world, but they're not, from another planet, if that's what you're asking. But thank you for the call. Not Gordo asks if I've ever been to any UFO crash sites during my travels. I have not. And I have to, admit, I'm not a boots on the ground investigator researcher. I'm first and foremost a broadcaster. I talk to the people that visit crash sites. How about you, Victor?
Well, I have been to the Corona crash site in New Mexico, and most people who have any kind of cursory knowledge about the Roswell incident, ascribe the whole incident as the crash at Roswell. It didn't happen at Roswell. It happened in a small farming community in Corona, New Mexico, and it's a very small town. There's a couple of stores, there's a couple of bars, that kind of thing. It's a very, very small place. But if you move forward out of there 2 or 3 miles, you move into where the ranch was, the Brazel Ranch, and you can drive off road into the area where it's purported that this particular craft did crash. And I have been there. I've driven up the dirt road, the arroyos that are there, the small hills, in close to Corona. There's really not a whole lot to see. I didn't go on any kind of archaeological digs at all, but I did go to the place where the crash purportedly did happen. I also had communication with Loretta Proctor, who was a friend of Max Brazel, who was actually in the debris field on his farm, on the farm that he was in charge of as a manager. And what Loretta Proctor told me is that Mac Brazel, after the incident, was on his horse, looking around.
And put your tray in the upright position. You're about to leave everything you know behind on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett from Zoomer Radio.
A quick programming note. Next week, Rocco Galati. If you've been following his exploits, Rocco is an attorney, and he has been fighting in court against lockdowns and the apparent, or not apparent, it's obvious erosion of civil liberties during the case-demic, as some call it. Rocco Galati will be here next week live for the full 2 hours, and I hope you can be on board for this one. It's I sincerely believe one of the most important programs I've done to date. Rocco Galati for the full 2 hours. Victor Viggiani is with us, and we will get back to the couple of YouTube live chat questions here in a moment. I wanted to go back to James Fox film, The Phenomenon, and ask you that part of the film dealing with after the collapse of communism, and my coast-to-coast colleague George Knapp was invited to go to Moscow and investigate, and he spoke with military personnel on that side and was sort of echoing what was happening at nuclear bases over here, particularly in the United States. But there's something that's kind of gnawing at me, and that is, while in the U.S. at Malmstrom and Minot and Ellsworth Air Force bases, the UFOs were turning the missiles off. They were taking them offline. But there was at least one incident in Ukraine at a nuclear base where they had triggered the launch signal. In other words, they turned it on. That doesn't sound to me like they were trying to avert nuclear war, that almost sounds like they were up to mischief. They were trying to cause something. I mean, the personnel in Ukraine had to scramble. You can imagine the panic. They see the countdown has begun on these missiles. What did you think about that?
Well, yeah, I in watching that whole thing, I forget the Russian individual. It began with an M, but in any case, it was a Russian individual. Whether they're turned on or off, that is definitely an issue. The launch commanders in the United States indicated, as well as visits to Rendlesham Forest in the UK, that there was some sort of interference with nuclear weapons. The turning on of these things in the Ukraine indicate to me, in a similar way, whatever these craft are, these intelligent craft under intelligent control are, I don't know whether turning them on or turning them off is the issue. As far as I'm trying to assess this, in a holistic way, what I think is really being pointed to here, Richard, is that they have control of the situation, and they are telling us, or the people who are in charge of these nuclear weapons, that they have control and they can turn them on or turn them off. I don't have any doubt that there's no reason for them to turn these things on to start a nuclear event. I don't think that was their intention, because even if they did turn them on, they probably understood that whoever's in charge of these missile silos could turn them off. And this happened, within the Malmstrom situation too. They went offline and they brought them back online on their own. I think what happened there, I'm just speculating, it's my own assumption, that whoever these beings are that are coming into the airspace are saying to us, we have control over what you're doing, so don't mess around with these things, because if you do decide to engage in some sort of nuclear event, we can control whatever you do. So let's just not fool around with this stuff.
Well, perhaps,
yeah,
except
I'm not sure what other conclusion you can come to. You may have another.
Well, I come back to that word mischief, because as
Right.
James Fox points out in the film, and he shows, there's a chart there. He shows the number of nuclear tests that have been conducted by all, not only the United States, but also the Soviet Union, and I believe China and many other countries have tested their, where were the UFOs then? Where were they in August of 1945 when two of them were used? That's always puzzled me. I don't have the answer.
Yeah, right.
But I just find that kind of a puzzle.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind, or that has come to mind to me with respect to all of the nuclear types of incidents, is not just what is happening with each individual case, but it also indicates to me that there may be a number of species that are involved in these kinds of activities. So if you have, let's call them species 1 does one thing with these nuclear assets, and species 2 does another thing with these nuclear assets. I think sometimes we are overridden by the assumption that there is one species doing these things. My sense is that, and the information we have from a number of contactees, that there are a realm, a whole broad spectrum of species that interact with us. Now, whether their craft are all the same, whether they're different, whatever that might be. But there's not just one species interacting. So if that's the case, if there are a number of species interacting with us, they each may have a different agenda in whatever kind of messaging that they are putting in place to talk to us about the nuclear situation that we're in. So any one of them could do any number of things to do whatever they want with these nuclear assets to send us a message. It's much like, you know what, Richard? It's much like the crop circle situation. Yeah, I've seen so many beautiful kind of indications that these crop circles are a form of language for us or to us about who these beings might be. And the category of languages that are involved in the way these crop formations are formed indicates to me that there are a number of species involved in sending us messages about who they are, why they're here, and what they want to try to say to us as Earthlings, as beings on this planet. So there's a number of messages that are coming down the pipe. So I don't think we can kind of just say that one thing is happening about the nuclear incident that says, yeah, it's just one species doing this. I think there's a whole number of variables involved in all of this.
And which begs the question, what is their intent? And there seems to seems to be intentions that are at cross purposes. Go back to the YouTube live chat. Jay Lee asks, have any of the African school children created enduring interests or careers that followed the incident? This would be the Ariel School in Zimbabwe in '94. Do you know of any children that went on to pursue sort of an interest in UFOs?
Well, not specifically with UFOs as researchers, but I know that I'm thinking back now to the actual film. I'm trying to think back in my mind. They were sitting around a table, and I think there were 4 individuals.
One of whom was wearing a Toronto Blue Jays sweater.
That's
I wonder,
right.
Is that a local connection, or
yes, there is, and that's another story altogether, which we can get into at some point. But I know that the 4 individuals that I saw around the table, one of them was a teacher, still involved in it. One of them was a social worker, and another one was some sort of medical. It wasn't a doctor or anything like that, but a medical practitioner of some kind. But they've all been involved in some sort of social aspect of this that involves them with people who may have had experiences or may have had some sort of involvement in sort of the sociological, interaction with people. So none of them were sort of bank accountants or anything like that, as far as I know. But the 3 of them I know for a fact were involved in some sort of social careers that brought them involved with people.